Right about now. Okay, we're recording. All right, so this month's topic is all on navigating negative feedback of coaches. It's not always a fun thing to do, but being in your guys' roles, sooner or later, it's going to happen. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to deal with just, something, a client's going to bring something to your attention that was just not a good experience. So, no matter how hard we try, we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. Coaches make mistakes. Sometimes us as directors, we don't communicate to the coaches as clearly as we think we do. Sometimes things get lost in translation there. Sometimes maybe it just could be the client's expectations are just not appropriate or what they thought should happen. Again, this isn't one, I'm not someone that's like, no, the customer's always right. It's like, no, I wouldn't tell them that, but they're not always right. Like again, sometimes they make mistakes. So it does happen. So things are going to go wrong. The important thing, though, is that we do everything we can to minimize the frequency of these situations. And when they do happen, like let's learn from it in order to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. And so there's really three things to think about within this whole kind of topic. The part one is prevention, which obviously, if we can eliminate things from happening in the first place, like that makes our lives a lot easier. Again, not always an option, but in my experience, when there's something that goes wrong and a client shares negative feedback, in my experience, it's almost always a lack of execution with our seven core tenets, or a coach failed to read the client notes or modify things appropriately. It again, there's always those one-off random cases, but most of the time it's usually something around they didn't follow the seven core tenets, or things weren't the exercises weren't appropriate. It could be where they were given the wrong weights, the wrong exercise. Like, hey, he had me do lunges even though I've got bad knees. There's something there. So if we can avoid it altogether, that's obviously the best plan of attack. So just kind of a quick couple things, three quick things to think about is one, as directors, I would be asking like, all right, how often are you reviewing the seven core tenets with your team? Are they, I would suggest, are they posted in plain sight somewhere in the office, just, or like somewhere out of sight of the clients, just so that there's that constant reminder as far as like why we have them and what they're all about. So I think they should be in writing. I think it's good to make sure you're bringing them up in meetings on a regular basis. I would say like, how often are you bringing them up? Something we do that you guys can implement is we have a weekly focus. Every single week, it's like this is the one thing we're focusing on. And the reason we do that is because if we try to focus on 10 things, nothing gets done. So we really try to simplify it as much as possible. And it's like, all right, this week, we're really focused on making sure we greet every single person within 5 seconds they walk in the door. It seems super simple, but by breaking it down to the like bite-sized pieces, I believe it really improves the execution. So you could do that and have like every week you just go from step one through step seven, and just repeat 7 weeks, and you're going to sound like a broken record and it's going to get annoying, but you got to keep doing it. Something Rick, I've heard him say for years in presentations is like one of your jobs as a leader is to be the chief reminding officer. And so it's just that constant mundane repetition of the basics. So that's one thing I would say. I would say then, are coaches modifying exercises appropriately to each individual? And, are they following the notes that are in Trainerize? And then, to check that, I would say, audit your team and make sure, are they following the seven core tenets? Does it look like everyone's workout is appropriate to each individual? Are we doing things? Is everyone getting the same generic workout so that it starts to sound like that C word that we're not allowed to use? Or are we modifying things appropriately to each person? So obviously, step one is prevention. And again, if we can eliminate some of those mistakes from happening before they happen, we don't have to worry about the negative feedback and our lives are much better. But as we know, that's not always the case. And that's where we move on to kind of part two, which is all about gathering feedback from clients. With client feedback, I always think of the idea like the saying that, where there's smoke, there's fire. And not all feedback is valid. However, there's an ounce of truth to most feedback. Even if it's like, you know what, I don't think this client is completely right with their feedback. There's usually something in there that we can pull away from that, some little gem or nugget that we can take to improve our performance as a team or help our coaches continue to improve. So when I'm gathering feedback from clients, there's really like four things that are really important. The first thing is I just want to apologize. I don't want to make any excuses. No, I hate that when you get on the phone with businesses and they go into excuse mode about like, well, it was this or that. It's like, no, just apologize. Hey, Whitney, I'm really sorry about that. Like, I'm so sorry that was your experience. That's not what we strive to do here at Alloy Personal Training. So step one, just apologize. Again, we don't have to make any excuses or point any fingers. Step two, take action to make it right for that client. If you're not sure what to do, you could ask them. But if there's something you can do to make it right, do it. A good example of this would be, if a client's complaining about their workout, like, hey, they gave me stuff that was way too advanced, then I would be like, you know what, Annie, I'm so sorry about that. I'm going to go in your notes right now and make some adjustments so that this does not happen again. You want to confidently let the client know, like, hey, I heard you and I am making it right. I'm taking steps, I'm taking action now to make sure that you don't have a similar experience again in the future. The third thing I want to do is I want to thank the customer for complaining. No one likes complaints, but as I mentioned, like complaints are an opportunity for us to improve. I would also, something that I've seen over the years, and it's frustrating when this happens, but for every client that complains, there's others that probably feel the same way and just aren't speaking up. I've had situations where I've had to let trainers go, and I think about with my gym that's been around for 13 years. After I let someone go, I would have a handful of clients come up to me and say something to me, and I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me this 2 months ago?" And it's either like, I don't know, or oh, I thought you knew and you just didn't care, like about that particular problem. And it's like, no, I had no idea that was a problem. So anytime, again, whether we agree with it or not, anyone that's willing to have an uncomfortable conversation with us and give us feedback, I think we should thank them. Again, doesn't mean they're always right, but we should encourage that. And then the fourth step to gathering feedback is to write it up and make sure it's documented. Make sure what was the issue, what was the conversation that was had, and then what was the solution or the next course of action. Again, it could be going into your internal team communication, whether it's like Slack or Discord or Voxer or something like that, and just saying like, hey, I talked to Sally. She really feels like her knees have been killing her lately. We really need to do a better job of being careful with our the lower body exercises that we give her within her workouts. So we want to document it. I want everyone on the team to know what's going on. Now, I'm not going to throw any of our coaches specific to this conversation. If someone specifically was complaining about Scott and be like, yeah, Scott hurt me, I'm not going to share that with the team. But I do want to share like, hey, here's what's going on and here's what we need to do moving forward. I do want to make sure I share that with the entire team. So that's part two. And then really the uncomfortable part for us, which is part three, this is really the meat and potatoes of this, which is sharing feedback with the coach. I get it. It's not fun. This is one of the least favorite parts of our job as leaders, I'm sure, is having to share critical feedback with coaches or having to give them negative feedback. I would say, first of all, it's tricky because it varies based on the individual. It depends on your relationship with the individual and just knowing them in person. Three best practices that I can tell you are one, just praise in public, critique in private. Again, I'm never going to criticize someone or be like, hey, you hurt that person in front. I never want to call someone out in front of others. It's usually, or I want to avoid it as much as I possibly can. Again, sometimes it's unavoidable, but if it's something that is with a coach that if we can avoid doing that, I think it's usually better. The second thing is the timing of the feedback. Almost always sooner is better. If a client got hurt, if a client had a bad experience, you don't want to wait a week to provide feedback. You want to provide that feedback as quick as possible. You don't want to let time pass. Now, that being said, the timing does matter. There's times where I might need to share something that I know is going to be a negative conversation with a coach. I don't want to do that 5 minutes before their session starts because that could, depending on the coach, that could completely throw them in a tailspin, and then it's going to lead to a negative experience, which only makes things worse. So I'm typically not going to do it 5 minutes before they're about to go in front of other clients. So you may need to adjust the timing a little bit, but you don't want this to drag on for a week. The third best practice, and I think this is something that if you're not doing is really helpful, is to ask for permission. And what I mean by that is just saying like, hey, Landon, I've got some feedback for you. Is now a good time? If Landon's like, actually, John, I've got a doctor's appointment in 15 minutes. I got to go. Then, oh, no, hey, no problem, man. Hey, let's touch base tomorrow after your morning sessions and we can connect then. Sound good? So again, if someone's like head is already on the way to a doctor's appointment or something, I'm not like, it's not going to make things any better if we're trying to force them to stay behind. So now they're waiting for another appointment or a meeting. So again, that doesn't make anything better. So I want to ask permission. Is now a good time? Now, if someone says no, and then tomorrow they say no, well, then that might be a different conversation because we can't put this off forever. But if now is not a good time for whatever reason, and we need to wait till tomorrow, like I can do that. I'm not going to wait 2 weeks, but waiting one day is maybe okay. And I think this is important because feedback is typically a negative experience. And so the only way to make it less negative is if the individual is giving you permission and asking for it and saying like, nope, you know what, John, now is a good time. So that's really how I want to kind of lay the foundation for giving someone feedback. Now, when it comes to actually giving them feedback, there's really 5 steps that I want to think about. All right. The first step is to share the facts. All right. No feelings, no emotions. I tell my team all the time, half jokingly, but half not, got to bury those emotions. They're not real. Just bury them. So like I said, we want to talk about the facts. All right. And so we want to share the facts about the specific situation. Now, I would say how I'm going to share this feedback depends on the individual and the relationship with them. So for example, I'll give you 2 scenarios that happened in the last 3 months that my team they're familiar with the parties. A couple months ago, we had a client complain to Aaron over the phone about one of our coaches. And I listened to the call, and it was very straightforward. And the feedback, I thought the feedback was warranted. And so the particular coach that this was about, who's no longer with us anymore, I told her she needed to go listen to the call. The reason I did that was because I think she needed some humble pie. She was overconfident in her skills. And it was like, no, you need to hear straight from the horse's mouth. Like, you're not doing your job. You're not as great as you think you are. And so in that situation, I wanted her to listen to the phone recording. And I know she didn't like it, but I think it was appropriate. We had a situation just this week where on Monday with Kelly, and she had a phone call with one of our clients. and he was upset by one of the trainers. And I told her, don't have him listen to the phone call. And it's not that it was like that much more negative, but it's a newer trainer and his confidence isn't good yet. And I'm like, I want you to like, not, I don't want, I'm afraid this feedback hearing the client would just crush him and crush his confidence. So in that situation, I'm like, it needs to come from you, not have him listen to the call. And so the feedback's going to depend on the person. Like how I might be like, hey, go listen to this phone call. You need to hear what the client said. Or maybe I want to, bring it down a notch and share and kind of soften the blow a little bit if it's someone that's lacking confidence. So again, how I share the facts is going to be dependent on the trainer and my relationship with them and what I think is most appropriate. At the end of the day, this is sometimes tough and you got to use your best judgment. But I just want to be as specific as possible. Hey, Annie, on Friday during your 6 a.m. session, Zach came up to me afterwards and said that like he just didn't feel like you were correcting his form at all whatsoever. And he specifically was talking about on his deadlift and bench press. So again, I want to share the facts. I want to be as specific as possible on Friday at 6 a.m. so that it's the more specific you can get, the better. You don't want just some generic like, hey, a client mentioned that you weren't giving them any coaching cues, because that doesn't really help them. So I want to be specific with the facts as possible. Once I've done that, step 2, I want to express my feelings about the facts and the damage to the relationship. And so a lot of times I want this to come across as like, hey, I'm looking out for you as a coach. And so that could be like, hey, listen, Scott, when you give a client too heavy of a weight, man, they're going to lose trust in you. And we don't want that. Or it could be, hey, Wes, when you give a client, when you give a client lunges, even though they've got, really bad knees, it makes them not want to work with you anymore. Like I want Wes, I want Scott to know like, hey, this is the damage that's being done as a result of the facts, which are typically, a loss of trust. The client doesn't, want to work with you. They don't, or they're not into it. So I want to express the feelings about the facts and the potential damage to the relationship and let them know like, hey, your actions, this is how it's impacting the client and you as a coach. From there, this third step is I want to listen to the coach. I want to listen to their side of the story. And I'm not gonna judge them. I'm not going to agree with them or disagree with them. So again, just Whitney may come back and be like, "Well, John, actually, I did coach him up." And then again, I'm not agreeing with her or disagreeing with her. I'll hear you out, but that doesn't mean I think you're right or wrong. It's just, I'm going to hear you out. And again, I just want to open up a dialogue and an understanding. I want you to at least feel like you've been heard. All right. Because if it's just me shouting at you and you never getting a word in, like that doesn't really help our working relationship. So again, I don't have to agree with you, but I'm going to at least give you a chance to share your side of the story or, how you feel about that situation. Step 4, once you've got done sharing what you want, or your side of the story, then I want to share my wants. All right. This is this is all about like, hey, Kelly, this is what I want to see moving forward. Or, Erin had a situation, I believe a week ago that she told me about where a client basically was given too heavy of weights by a trainer. And she told the trainer, which I thought was great. She was like, hey, you need to apologize to Cindy when you see her Friday morning. And the trainer did. And my understanding is that afterwards things are much better. And the next workout was great. But that step 4 is you've got to state your wants from that coach. What do you want them to do? Do they need to go apologize to the trainer or to the client? Do they need to do again, do they need to do something else? Do they make any sort of changes or modifications? But state what you want. State what you want to see moving forward. Hey, the next time you're working with Sally, I need you to make sure that you that you don't do any sort of lunging or unilateral knee dominant movements because those really bother her knees. So make it clear what you want. And then the fifth and final step is to agree on the action. And so basically, you're just summarizing everything and making sure we're in agreement. So it'd just be like, all right, Aaron, you need to apologize to Cindy Friday morning, and then I need you to make sure that moving forward, you don't do any unilateral lower body exercises with her. That sound good? So I want to, again, make sure I want to get a verbal response. We are on the same page, right? There's no misunderstanding. And so that's my approach for sharing feedback is, first I want to ask for permission, make sure it's, is now a good time, and I want to do it in private and as quick as possible. And then from there, I want to share the facts. I want to explain the potential damage to the relationship. I want to let the other person share their side of the story and, however they feel about it. And then I want to make it clear this is what I want to see happen. And then I want to make sure to agree to action, make sure we're on the same page. I know it was a lot summarized. Does anyone have a recent situation like this that's came up? I know I mentioned 2 or 3 that we've had at Blue Ocean and at Alloy recently, but Landon, have you had any situations like this pop up lately where you've had to give a coach, some tough feedback?
Not so much in session related, but kind of just overall, you know, it's weird when there's 7 people on one side. We have one of the two. We have the only 2.
Mhm.
It's
Yep.
weird when there's 7 people on one side and one person on the other, or 7 people on one side and you're doing nothing. It's not a great look. It's not our product. Let's make sure that we are, dividing that group accordingly. These people well enough that we can make that work. So we've been fortunate enough to not have, many in session things that at least have come to my attention. I'm sure we've had many in session things that we could be doing better, 100%,
Sure.
obviously. But I take another a preemptive step almost a lot of times. And, I'll regularly go over sort of like you said, the core tenets, but, sort of chief reminding officer, I'm a Rick disciple myself of, making sure that coaches understand without a doubt the standard. So it's really easy to hold them to the standard. Making sure that at least every other week, the standards of the session of putting people in trainer eyes, making sure we're not doing anything we're not supposed to. We go over regressions, progressions of the workouts during the meetings to try to go ahead and set that standard. Not to say that they will always follow it because of that, but I at least now have an extra leg to stand on to be like, we literally talked about this last week, putting people in trainer eyes. It says right here, no knee dom. You had her do a back squat. She's too timid to say no. Now she's quitting and she's not going anywhere. We can't be doing that kind of stuff. You got to put people in trainer eyes or whatever it might be.
Mhm. Yeah, no, an important little nugget there is the more frequently you're bringing up the 7 core tenets, the more frequently you're talking about regressions, uh, the less excuses coaches can give you with well, I didn't know or I forgot. It's like we talk about this every other week. This shouldn't, if we're talking about this isn't something that we talked about once 18 months ago. It's like, no, we're talking about it every other week. Like there shouldn't be any sort of disconnect. So Whitney, what about you? Have you had any conversations like this lately? Or any conversations that you need to have?
Yeah, probably one that I need to have. um, so I have a trainer that's he didn't, he's a man, but his wife just had a baby. And so he's in like new dad mode. And one of our more outspoken clients in the early morning block kind of just said, well, I feel like he's not really there sometimes. And he seems kind of, and she's like, I understand that he's coming from, a whole change in his life, but so it's just about kind of now I'm trying to figure out how to approach that with him. We're doing quarterly reviews, and so I'm about to sit down with him like one on one anyway. So I thought that would be a good time to do that and then maybe implement the 5 things that you just went through. I wrote them all down. I mean, what are your thoughts on sharing that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the sooner the better. Now,
Yeah.
now that being said, I mean, better late than never. So,
Yeah, right.
but I think that's, and it's not like that. To me, that's not brutal feedback. If someone's head's not in the game, and given that someone just had a baby, like I'm not shocked to hear that. But at the same time, like, you're hired to do a job. And
Right.
Landon's point, like we have standards, and that's one of the things that I think makes us unique. Unlike a lot of personal training companies, like we expect our teams to perform at a high level. This isn't a big box gym where trainers are just walking around on their phones. Like that's not how we operate. And so I do think that's good feedback to share with him and to say like, hey, you know what? I received some feedback recently that you weren't, again because it's now been a while. I received some feedback that your seems like your head's just not in the game during sessions. You know,
Hmm.
in that situation, I might approach it as like, is everything okay? I'll share, it seems like your head's hasn't been in the game lately. Is everything okay? And that kind of gives them, it's kind of like now you're listening to their side of the story. And
Hmm.
and it could be a lot of things. It could be, like, oh, I'm not sleeping, I'm up at night. It could be, maybe there's something else. My wife and I are having trouble now. It could, yeah, again, it could be a lot of things. Who knows? But I do think that it does give him an opportunity, to share so that you're at least more aware of what's going on. I also think it's a great way to just show that you care. If
Hmm.
it's just like if you're just like I don't really care about your side of the story. Just do your damn job. Like that doesn't, it's probably not gonna, it usually doesn't go over very well.
Hmm.
Especially if you haven't had a conversation like this before. Now, if you're having the same conversation over and over again, I would say the conversations need to elevate each time. And they do need to get a little bit more serious, and the consequences need to go up with them if you're having the same conversation over and over again. But if this is like a first conversation like this, um, I wouldn't, unless someone does something really bad, the first time they do something wrong, like I'm not gonna punish them, like unless it's like something really extreme. It's just like, hey, don't do that, and then you move on. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. I'm not going to dwell on this forever, but it's like, hey, don't do this thing anymore, and now let's move on. So I do think the most important thing is that it does need to be discussed. And I think just sharing like, hey, some people in our 6 a.m. session, said that they felt, they've been feeling like you've been just not into the sessions lately.
Hmm.
And then from there, like I said, you ask, is everything okay? And then based on his, as long as there's not like something, crazy, earth shattering that that takes the conversation a different direction. Then from there, it's just like, okay, well, what can we do moving forward to, maybe pick that energy back up? And sometimes with coaches, they just need to be reminded. They're like, yeah, you know what? You're right. I haven't been doing this or that. So sometimes it's, oh, we got a new guest. Sometimes it could be something like that.
Hmm. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Annie, what about you? Any conversation like, any conversations like this that you've had lately or have to have or?
Um, lately, no, but we have had like some issues with staff members. I guess the most recent one is we have a new hire who's been with us just for a couple of months, and she's got the personality, she's got the magnetism that we're looking for in a trainer, but she's very green. So when it comes to her knowledge base, she's used to just working with one-on-one clients. So it's taken her, there's a learning curve with getting used to smaller groups. And then like her knowledge base with regressions isn't that great. And so the easy thing is the way the Alloy program is written is like literally if you don't know what to do, it's already there for you. You just have to pay attention to what the notes are and stuff. So we're working on that with her. So I've been asking a lot of like the people that I closely know in her sessions, like, hey, give me some feedback. Just let me know what you think because she's coachable, which is good. I haven't gotten any negative feedback, but there's definitely been like we could use more of such and such. So I've just been addressing that as a group in our meetings. As far as more negative feedback, I do have a trainer that she's actually been with me since we opened. And again, the personality is there. She's got the gift of being able to really connect with clients, phenomenal communication skills. But it got to the point where I had people coming to me and saying, I don't want to be in her session anymore. I want to be moved to a different time. I want to be with you. I want to be with Joelle or something like that, or Whitney when she was with me. And so it just became very concerning. And then Dr. Jolson he sees some of them as patients and they're like, I got hurt in her session, that kind of thing. So we became super concerned. But the problem is when you have somebody that fits the personality and fits the vibe that we want, but the skill level isn't there, what do you do? And that's a really tough place to be as a director because it's like, you could have the best trainer, which I had a really great trainer when we first opened, but he was an absolute asshole as a human being. And he was great with the clients, a terrible employee. So we got rid of him because as good of a trainer as he was, I'd much rather have somebody who has the personality and the team playing mentality of this girl who could also be coachable. So I had that hard conversation with her, just letting her know. I didn't give her specific names of feedback. I just said, hey, there seems to be a pattern with some of the things that I'm hearing about sessions, and I'm on your side, I'm on your team. And I think that you have a lot of potential to be great here, but we got to figure out what the deficit is and how to improve that. And she got emotional with me because she really does love Alloy. But I told her, I'm like, I'm here to help you. So tap into that. Like, if you need help, if you need to know what to do, if we need to come up with a better process so that you know how to serve each one of these people, let's do that. Let's come up with that solution. So we were able to. And what's awesome is over the last 4 months, probably, I've had more people like she has greatly improved in every area. I've had more people give me such positive feedback about her. They absolutely love her. People are like, they say classes, unfortunately. We don't, but they said the clients do. But they're like, I love her class. It was so much fun. She pushed me. So it's like that. You just have to be really like careful and you have to figure out as a director at what point do you cut the tie, or what point do you recognize the benefit of keeping that person on if they're coachable and teachable to fit the culture that you're trying to establish? So that's kind of what we went through.
Yeah, I on that last comment you made, I have two thoughts that come to mind. One, when do you cut ties versus when do you keep working with someone? And unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with this, way more than I would like. But there's two thoughts that come to mind. One is, are we having the same conversations? And if we're having the same conversations, this is a problem. And I mean, like same conversations as, and I think of a guy we had, I don't know, about a year ago, and it was like we had an issue on, I don't even remember what the problem was, but it was with the step up, like pretty relatively basic exercise. And and it was like, hey, quit doing this. I want you to do this. Here's why. And we went through that several times, and then I still saw it being wrong on the floor. And I'm like, well, they got to go. I'm like, if we're having the exact same conversations, then you've got to go. If we're like I said, if you're not seeing improvements. Now, if it's like, well, they're getting a little better here, but there's still issues over here, like that might be a different story. But again, if it's like, no, we're talking about the exact same thing here, and you're still, if we're talking about coaching a step up 3 and 4 times, like I can't help you any more than that. So that's one thought is, are you having the same conversations? And if so, and things aren't improving, then that probably tells you what you need to know. The second thing, and this was something a mentor of mine, um, that really high up corporate executive told me probably like 15 years ago when I was struggling with, actually maybe not quite that long, but it was one of my first employees. I had no idea how to manage employees. And I had no clue what I was doing. And I was telling him like, man, I'm frustrated. This guy's just like, calling in sick all the time, showing up late. And at the time, I didn't know how to handle it. And the thing that he said to me that I will never forget is he said, John, when you can put your head on the pillow at night and say that you've done everything you possibly can to make this person successful and they're still not successful, it's time to let them go. And it's like, can you say, if I was saying like, I've kind of helped Landon out like here or there, like, I talked to him twice. It's like I could still say like, well, no, that's on me. But if I can say like, no, I have poured into him. I have done everything I could to help him be successful and he's still not successful, then I know it's time to part ways. And so that was something, like I said, a mentor of mine shared that it's just like, can you say, hey, I've done everything within my power to make them, succeed here? And if you can answer yes, and they're still not successful, then you shouldn't, it sucks letting someone go, but at least you've got the peace of mind of knowing like, hey, I did everything I could. And so that to me has something, like I said, it's stuck with me for a long time. And and every time I've let someone go, it's been I have yet to regret it. Let's put it that way. Because I always made sure it's like, I've done everything I could. And so as long as you can say that, then like I said, there's your answer. Anyone else got any other thoughts on this conversation, on negative conversations with employees or sharing negative feedback?
I will say one thing. I'm in my opinion, a really good example of what Annie was talking about. I interned at what now is the original Alloy, but when it was a different name in college. And then they hired me halfway through my internship. I had never coached before. I had never been a personal trainer before. They had a trainer that was there for 6 years, had an unbelievable following, completely full-time, full schedule of members. She had to go on a leave for medical issues. I all of a sudden was a full-time personal trainer with people who had been training someone for 5 straight years. I made every little mistake you could possibly make. I didn't make the same mistake twice, but I made every little mistake you could possibly make. I had no idea really what I was doing. I was completely unprepared for it. No fault of, the people that were getting me ready, but had I had a really short leash because I kept making little mistakes, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be, area directing 4 clubs or anything like that, so there is a lot to be said for Annie's, the person fits. I can correct their issues. I think it's worth correcting, as long as they're not, like you were saying, the same thing over and over and over again. Because as we all have found, all of y'all have found, you all have successful clubs, finding the right personality, the right work ethic, the right vibe is almost just as, if not more important than finding somebody who's really, really, really smart and a great trainer. I would put them equally, if not a little bit more. So, worth working with those people, as long as it's not repeated mistakes, worth working with that person and helping them understand, I just want you to do as good a job as possible. You have all of these great attributes. This is something you could be doing better. Let's fix it, kind of thing. One other thing that Rick always talked about and Matt always talked about too, that I think is big. It's not coach feedback, any feedback. One of the things they said all the time was, if anybody mentions anything, it's a big deal. They've already thought it for months. So if somebody mentions the club's dirty or the music's loud or anything like that, all of that kind of feedback, if somebody says it might come off as like, man, music's really loud today. They have thought the music's way too loud for a long time in their sessions, and they just mustered the strength to say it. They don't want to say it negatively, so they said it sarcastically. So any feedback, honestly, is worth listening to tenfold over anything, not just coach-related feedback, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's why I mentioned like when someone gives you feedback, thank them, because people don't like to give feedback. Like they don't like having a negative or uncomfortable conversation. So when they finally do, to your point, yeah, they've probably thought it 4 or 5 or 15 times prior. It's usually not the first time. So I do think, yeah, anytime you get any sort of feedback, like there's usually something there and you need to take it seriously and you need to thank the person for sharing it. So that's a great nugget. Cool. Anything, I guess, to wrap this up real quick, anything you'd like to see discussed next month?